Thank you. I recognize the member from Member Cook Tantramar.
Thank you. I'm rising to speak on Bill 32 today, and my concern is related, as I think we've heard from many members today, is related to how these funds are spent. And we saw recently that the funds that went into the climate change fund were not fully spent. 10 million of the 36 million that was allocated to go to climate change projects, 10 million of that was not spent on climate change projects. And it even appears that the way these funds were spent was to look back over the fiscal year. I mean, these were only announced in March, and that's the end of the fiscal year, to look back and say which departments had projects that could count towards climate change, which shows a lack of planning and a lack of vision, a lack of clear criteria, as my colleague, the member from Fredericton South, spoke of. What is the criteria for qualifying for climate change funds? I've actually had people since the committee last week emailing me and saying, I've got ideas, there's projects in my community, how do we get our hands on this $10 million? How do we apply for future funds? And so I hope that the Committee on Climate Change and Environmental Stewardship will listen to the public as soon as possible. There was a motion passed, and look at where the funds can go, because currently it seems that there really isn't clear criteria, and it's to the detriment of our climate change action, because that means it's not even all getting spent. This year it's looking like the same amount, 36 million. I don't know if it'll all get spent. I don't know what'll happen to it. But it looks like there are some projects identified. But I'm kind of scratching my head as to why these projects were chosen. Why the wharf and a quay are going to be some of the key projects. I agree, obviously, with working on the climate change action plan. That's great. I am concerned about funding, a large chunk of funding last year and this fiscal year and going forward, going towards nuclear technology. And there's multiple reasons that I'm concerned about that. One of the reasons is that there's risk to nuclear technology in terms of the waste, the storage, many issues with that. But the other reason is that this technology isn't really going to be online for a long time. And you know what? The climate crisis is a crisis, and that means it's urgent. That means, frankly, we're too late on a lot of the actions we should have already taken. The planet has already warmed a significant amount. We are already seeing significant harms done to New Brunswickers. People in my riding, their wells are running dry. There's been a hay shortage, other crop failures. There's already big problems. We're seeing this on a global scale, and we're seeing it locally as well. And so, to not spend even what was allocated is unacceptable, and I do have concerns about going forward that we aren't even investing in the right stuff. When we look at the things that we could be investing in, but frankly are barely investing in, it's things like energy efficiency. And there's a good reason to invest in things like energy efficiency, because there's multiple benefits. Not only does that help to mitigate climate change because it reduces emissions, but it can directly help New Brunswickers. If we look at their homes or their businesses, but I'm particularly thinking of seniors, for example, that can have the effect of helping people stay in their homes. It can help to reduce their heating costs while addressing climate change. And these are the types of projects we need to see bigger investments in, and so far we're not seeing it. And we have wait lists for these types of projects that do exist so far in social development and MB Power. There are wait lists, which shows that there is demand, and yet we're not fully funding it. We're also not fully funding, there's been a reduction in the funding that goes towards DTI and the type of energy efficiency projects that they've been doing in the government buildings. And we heard in committee that the funding's going up and down, and it's kind of a roller coaster, and it's hard for them to plan, and they'd like to have as much as they can to work on having greener, cleaner energy, on energy efficiency specifically in these buildings. And we also heard that there's not a clear vision with a timeline and priorities for some of the climate change action plan items that they're supposed to be working on in their departments. That is a big problem. This plan's been around for years, and we are hearing from deputy ministers that there's problems with the implementation, and that needs to be addressed. And part of that has to do with what's actually in the plan, is what we heard, but part of it has to do with the funding, that they don't have the funding that they need to do to meet these goals that have been assigned to them. So we need money to mitigate. And we need money to be targeted to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable, the people who are most impacted by the changes in our climate, are supported. And so energy efficiency is one way. Investing in renewable energy is essential. I'm not talking about nuclear. I'm talking about all the energy that's already proven, and that people all around New Brunswick are knocking down government's doors saying, please let us build these projects in our communities, whether it's wind or solar, and they just keep hitting roadblocks. We can do better. We can absolutely do better. We also need to be looking at resilience. And so I do recognize that there are some adaptation projects. I'm not sure if these should just be built in to every single department in terms of maintaining the dikes, looking at roads and replacing culverts. These, I think, need to just become the standard, budgetary items of different departments, because that's not going away. That needs to just become part of the budget. So some of those things are coming out of the Climate Change Fund. I'm glad they're being done. They're underfunded, but those I don't even think should be part of a special fund that's taking. That should be taking stronger action. That should just be part of the budget at this point, because what we're looking at is changes in precipitation, changes in weather that will mean we need bigger culverts all over the province and better engineering and all of that. That's just the reality. There are opportunities that have been missed here. Another one that we see in the news, especially because yesterday PEI announced that they're going to be creating an incentive for electric vehicles. And that is something that I would like to see in this province. And it's not the only way to address our transportation issues. We also need to look at public transportation. But the reality is there are people who are going to need to drive in this province, especially before we've made sure we have proper bus routes and train routes and things like that. And we do need electric vehicles. And there's the federal incentive, and our neighbours are now going to be incentivizing that. And we haven't even met our 2020 goal of 2,500 electric vehicles. I don't know how we're going to meet the 2030 goal of 20,000, I believe it is. But PEI is talking about having every vehicle be an electric vehicle. That's the type of ambition that we need to see, and one of the ways to get there is to have clear timelines, clear plans, and clear criteria for how this money is going to be spent. And at this point, I'm not seeing that, and it is unfortunate. There is so much more to be done. There really needs to be more of a sense of urgency, and that is my main concern with when we're talking about these funds, that I'm worried that they're not going to be spent in the right place. They haven't been so far. There's some projects, like I said, that make me scratch my head that really aren't going to help us get where we need to go. And so I would argue that we need to have better parameters on where this funding gets spent, and that we need to have a sense of urgency and look at what are the priorities. Again, in committee, we heard Deputy Minister saying, what are the key priorities? What is the most important stuff we should be working on? And if that's not clear from the current implementation plans, then we've got a big problem, because our current plan is about to expire and needs to be renewed, and that is something that should be kept in mind as that process happens. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to speak to Bill 32, and I thank you for your time.